and they say this is because there are many baptisms in the New Testament, but none of them use this formula. So either they're all rejecting Jesus' command, or this is a later addition, which I believe is more the case.
I understand. Even in Genesis 1, you find out there's God and the Spirit of God. So that's right there.
Where's the word?
Huh?
Where's the word? Why not the Trinity? By the way, you say Spirit of God. Do you know that the Father...
You know who walked in heaven?
So in Genesis chapter 1, it does say that the Spirit of God hovered above the waters. The Christian is suggesting that the Spirit is actually God, but does that even make sense? Ruach means a wind or a force, and if you read Genesis 1, it makes absolute sense to read it as a life force when that translation is a possibility. And this life force was above the waters, or this animating power was above the waters. This is also because when you just read it with the meaning of life force, the whole of the passage afterwards makes absolute sense. And I'll show you how. That Ruach in Genesis 1, where it says the Spirit was above the waters, it actually refers to a life force rather than a person. It says in Genesis that the earth was formless and the Spirit of God was above the waters. When you read the Ruach as meaning life force or animating power, it gives a powerful link between the dry land and the water above in the sky, meaning the rain, which is that the Ruach, the Spirit, is a life force acting by God. This makes total sense. It would be totally random for Ruach to just mean this person. It is there for a reason when the author is linking how things on earth came to be. When we have a translation of Ruach to mean a force from God, which then creates life, why not take that reading, especially when it fits with why the water is gathered for the dry ground, which then has fruits and trees growing? The link is the Spirit, is the life force. Remember, the life force was with the water, the Spirit was with the water, and the water helped the plants to grow because God put a life force with the water. This link makes way more sense than to just say, oh, the Spirit is God, instead of looking at the deeper meaning. In fact, Spirit of God doesn't even mean that it is God. Like, there are many things that are of God without meaning that it is God. And we can see this throughout the Bible. For example, in Genesis chapter 13, verse 10, you have the garden of God. In Genesis chapter 6, verse 2, you see the sons of God, which are the angels. And no Jew or Christian interprets them as being God. A Christian might argue the Spirit of God, which, by the way, I just want to clarify. Spirit is different to soul. Okay, soul is the self. Whereas spirit is life, right? So if the Spirit is God, right, because of its closeness and attribute to God as being God's life, as they would say, which would imply that it's God himself, because it sounds like God's life, it's very close in attribute. That is a complete misreading, because if you actually think God's life was with the waters, taking it very, very, very literally, and the water was used to make life on earth, then that means all the vegetables have God's eternal life in them, which Jews and Christians would reject. This is why you have to read Spirit of God as a thing that belongs to God, not God's own life. But anyways, yeah, so it is universally not accepted that the children of God is literal in meaning God's biological children, which would imply anthropomorphism, divine children, and more persons of God, on top of the Unitarian God Jews believe in and the Trinitarian God Christians believe in, right? If you don't want to be careful with finding the meaning of Spirit of God, then do the same for children of God. Christians should make the children of God, the angels, as persons of God, just as they say the Spirit of God is a person of God, but they won't do that. This is why you take the more natural reading, the more contextual reading, that both the Spirit of God and the children of God have nothing to do with God's attributes or these other persons of God. As believers in the Quran, we have a verse that also clarifies this to us. Chapter 17, verse 85. It says, they ask you about the Spirit. Say the Spirit is from the command of my Lord, and you have been given of knowledge only a little. So the Spirit is from the command of God. It does things by God's order, and therefore it belongs to God as God commands it, and also it isn't God. So this is the clarification that Allah has given to the Jews and Christians, that the truth is that the Spirit belongs to God. Anyways, just a small point as well, just like I said about the difference between soul and spirit. Remember, also in the Quran we have the same. We have nafs and ruh. Nafs is the self and ruh is a life force. But yeah, that was just a clarification I wanted to give. So coming back to what I said, yeah, Trinitarians, you should approach Spirit of God like you do with the children of God in Genesis. The fact is that the Spirit and the children, they belong to God. They're not parts of God, they're not attributes of God, and they're not persons of God. They should both be approached the same way. I hope that gives clarity to Trinitarians as to why the Spirit of God can't be literally God in Genesis 1. Alright, peace.